Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Moment with the podcast where we are promoting positive mental well being and inspiring you guys to get out there, try something new, and chase your dreams. Today, I've got a very special guest on the show. I'm here with Filipo Fifita, aka Philly, who is going to open up to us a little bit about his journey with addiction and the route to sobriety. And the reason that I got Philly onto the show was because this guy is a personal trainer of real quick here, Philly. How many years? 9 years?
Bro, I've been group fitness instructor for 10 years. I've been a personal trainer for 5 years, for five
Okay.
of those
So,
years.
so hey, this man has been in the fitness industry for a decade. All right. And I used to work with this man at the gym. And let me tell you guys something. This guy is shredded. I mean, I would see this guy working out. I'm like, he is like a pinnacle of athletic nature. And so when I saw Philly start posting on his social media about his journey with sobriety and addiction, it honestly took me by surprise. And so I've invited him onto the show to talk about that journey. So, Philly, welcome onto the show and thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Oh, thank you, bro, for having me.
But all good, bro, all good. And so, Philly, I before we jump into it, I just need to quickly ask you. So, how long have you been sober?
I've been sober for 2 years now. So, yeah, it's actually been really cool. I actually really enjoy the whole sobriety thing, anyways. And yeah, COVID played a big role in it, but sort of has other things that's kind of like contributed to like the idea of actually giving up for it. So it's never in isolation.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so now that you've been sober for 2 years, when did you realize that your drinking was becoming a problem that you needed to address?
Oh man, where would you like me to start per se? Because there's few scenarios. Whereas in scenario one was like the environment I was in the gym. Scenario number two is my environment in general, and then like scenario number three is like my personal environment. So
Yeah,
like
I'll be keen to hear all of them because I feel like alcohol addiction is a topic that is relevant to a lot of people, and especially so here in New Zealand with binge drinking. So, I mean, just yeah, stage is yours. Just go through those different phases of it.
yeah, man. Okay, well, I'll start from like the external and then work my way in. Um, Basically, it was just my environment in general. So growing up from a small town, like we had like very little to do. So drinking was like the coping mechanism to kind of counter that. So I'm from a small town called Kirikiri in Bay of Islands, where like drinking is pretty massive. Like if you're not doing anything, you're either at the pub or you're getting a box. And if you're not getting a box, you're in the pub. So like it was always trying to find different ways to have fun, but we couldn't do it without alcohol. So that had a massive influence of like how I perceived alcohol. And then in doing so, I kind of took that perception everywhere with me, bro. Like to the workplace, coming into the workplace, it was like you work hard and then you drink hard. And because I was already drinking Hyundai airs up in Kirikiri, like I just amplified that even more because my current environment at the time was like saying, okay, that's actually okay. Like if you're working hard, it's okay to drink hard as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah, work
it just
hard,
kind
play
of
hard.
validated, yeah, it just validated my belief about alcohol.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then moving into like my personal life, bro, like I'm not ashamed of like opening up about this sort of stuff because my relationships has always been up and down, bro. And I've been in so many relationships, but the key factor that's always occurring is that arguments, breakups, all of that stuff is all triggered by alcohol. And like the bottom line is I can't handle my piss, bro. I was just in denial about it. Like, we're in this country that we're like, bro, it's all good. Just have a freaking drink, like have a beer and like run away from your problems. Like that's how I saw it. So like because I've had alcohol drinking culture as I grew up, then went into a workplace where it kind of validated a lot more. And then you have like your personal family, friends, and stuff like that, like who just made it a-okay to drink. Like it was just an accumulation, bro.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and on that note, how you're saying like around your friends and family, I just there was something I wanted to ask about that because I did see one of your posts that you did the other day, and you mentioned about the fact that your family migrated from Tonga, and I was just wondering, with that migration, obviously moving to a new place, there's somewhat of a shift in culture. Do you think that that is kind of embedded in uh, um, the migration to like drink as a means to cope with moving to a new place?
bro, that's actually interesting you asked that. Good question, by the way. Um, First of all, like moving over here, like my parents didn't know how to kind of cope with their problems from my perspective. And then because they didn't know how to cope with their problems, they came over to New Zealand, which they had no idea how to adjust to society. So because they don't differentiate what's good and what's bad, they just think everything that they did was a-okay, and that kind of trickled down on us. So, point being, like my mom, she came over here and she brought us over, and me and my little brother, we had no idea what New Zealand's like. We grew up in a small village, bro, Mo'ofanga, where your neighbors are literally like left, right, they're there for you, and you grow up with like a whole entire, like a little village, like they say. And then you come to New Zealand, where it's very isolated here, and you have to kind of like adapt and adjust. Like
Yeah,
that's heaps, bro. Like
yeah,
imagine,
for
like
sure.
imagine if you're like a foreigner, you couldn't speak the language, you don't know what life is like in New Zealand, and you're having to really, really quickly adapt. I
Hmm.
guess in a way, there's only so much a kid can take, and then we had to find ways to like kind of cope with it. For me, early drinking was in my house, like from an early age, bro.
Like,
And
what
so,
age are we talking here?
bro, I'm talking like 15, 16.
Right.
Um, and because I saw my mom drinking, so I was like, oh, okay, well that must be a-okay then. So that must be the cultural norm here in New Zealand that if you want to have a good time, you drink.
Yeah.
And if you want to have a good time, you bring your friends around. But the thing is, what happened is that my mom couldn't keep the social life and home separate. So home and the social life would merge together. So that's how I grew up, bro. So within that environment, I couldn't separate the difference between the two. So I would just think it's a-okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But to answer your question, yes, moving over from a different country to a new country and having to adjust to like social norms, it's really delicate. It's a delicate and fine line.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And so, I mean, that is definitely one of the reasons why, you and your family turned to the bottle. But you were saying earlier that, you've been going through some things and also your parents be going through some things. Did you find on your journey of sobriety that you were using alcohol as a trauma repressant? And if so, like what would you open up about some kind of traumas that you might have had that you felt you had to turn to the bottle to cope with?
Yeah, man, I think it's definitely um there's quite a few things anyways. So like because we grew up in a small town, I think we're basically one of the first Tongan families to kind of be there. So like again, it was kind of like adjusting to that. But then like you have your influences around that. They like drink and then smoke weed and stuff like that. So I guess my trauma was with that because my mom, like I'm not trying to blame it on her. I'm just saying this is the scenario that would happen, that she couldn't keep the social life and the personal life separate, I felt like I was kind of like lost. And then when she was away, I felt neglect. So when she was away, she couldn't see that I'm not coping very well with the adjustment. So I looked at what she was coping with, like how she was coping with her problems by either drinking or just going out all the time. So I thought they'll be like, okay, well, if she can do that, I can do that.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
that's one way of coping with problems, if I don't have to deal with it, if I could just numb it somehow, then obviously my mom is doing something right. So I kind of followed up to that. I'm not blaming her, like it's not just my mom per se. Um, but I had a pretty rough relationship with my stepdad because one, he wasn't my real dad, and two, like it was just a misunderstanding of basically how he would have run the house and how things will run back at home.
Hmm.
So I guess I would say that basically, uh, okay, fuck it, I'm just gonna be straight up about it. Like he was pretty violent in the way how he dealt with things because that's just a generic basis thing. But I don't think most stepdads are like that. But
Yeah.
the way he coped with it was like he was either violent towards us or we were just a bit of a hindrance to his daily routine or life. So
Yeah, yeah. So would you say that alcohol consumption was ever a positive thing? Because it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is that, it's used to cope with moving to a new place, it's used to cope with neglect, and I'm sure that, you would have used it after your stepfather turned violent sometimes as a means to sort of escape.
yeah, yeah, for sure, bro. 100%. I agree with that. It was just one of the many coping mechanisms, I should say. But yeah, alcohol was the easiest and accessible, I should say.
Yeah,
Like if
yeah.
it was there, so like I mean, it's just kind of like drugs, right? Like if you see drugs there as a kid, you'd be like, you want to experiment that and be like, okay, what did it actually do? But yeah, to answer your question, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But
And
yeah.
so I mean, having gone through all this and now being on the journey that you are, I just have to ask, so like, why do you share your journey? Why do you feel the need to post that and get it out there?
Um, I'm a I'm an absolute sucker in my belief in like helping the little guy. Like I just have that like in me like, that's what drives me. That I always think that what I do, what I say, and how I react to the situation, and how I kind of like portray and give information to people, is always for that, not for the masses, but for the one person who actually needs it the most. Um, it's a big driver for me for when I was actually starting group fitness instructing because like, bro, you have days and mornings where you're just like, oh, I can't be stuffed, bro. Like I cannot be stuffed getting up at 4:45, going to a class, yelling at people, learning choreography, teaching something that I might not be or may, make me happy. But I always think there's one person there who would be like, okay, like Philly's here, I will do the workout because he's doing it. And over time, it's obviously expanded, and then a lot of people kind of believe in what I'm trying to do and helping people. So, but yeah, it's always about the little guy. It's not about the masses for me. It's about one person or two people.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And I feel completely the same way about why I do this podcast because it's like if I can go out there and inspire one person to just like chase a dream of theirs or go try something new, then that's what I feel will give me fulfillment. So I fully am on the same page with you there. And just on this whole topic of addiction and sobriety, I was thinking about this, and one thing I want to know is, would you say that your addiction is dead, or do you think that it will always be something that you are trying to not get over, but like, keep improving your lifestyle?
It's funny you say that because I've actually been listening to a few podcasts and I actually do a lot of reading. Um, in saying that, I could never replace like a behavior. Like I cannot change a habit no matter how much I try because it requires a lot of willpower. So for me, the addiction aspect is always going to be there at the back of my mind, but I've always got to try to find something else to kind of replace the thoughts and the triggers of it. So like I'll tell you the story of how I actually started doing fitness.
Yeah.
Bro, I used to smoke, believe it or not. So it wasn't my first addiction to something. I used to smoke, and I realized for a while that willpower, bro, it just runs out. So I had to change my environment somehow. And in order to change my environment, my behavior will automatically change. And that's what they say in psychology, anyways. So I replaced smoking with running, and
Oh
then
yeah.
running, like, but for every cigarette that I used to have, I had to commit to 30 minutes of running, bro, and it was painful, bro, straight up. Like I used to come back from town, bro, and my lungs are just heaving, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
I don't even know if fresh air was a real thing. And so having to put your shoes on, like going to the gym or going for a run, it just reminded me of cigarettes. I still do it to this very day. But to
You
go
you
back to
still you still smoke occasionally?
now, I don't smoke, but and essentially the association between running and smoking,
I gotcha.
it just it slowly faded, but it took like 2 or 3 years, bro. Um, but I'll do all this running throughout the week, bro. It accumulates to like hours, right? And then I go back to town, and then they put it back straight on, like a whole packet in one night. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that
um,
it's deadly like that with those kind of addictions because it's just the thing is like it's so hard to go on a period of sobriety and then one mate is like, "Oh, bro, you want to go outside have a dart? Why
yeah,
not?" You know?
yeah, bro. It's just one. It's just one. That's like the key thing, eh? But yeah, to go back to your question, addiction is always going to be there for me. I've just found better ways to cope with it, and
Yeah,
I've just
yeah.
found like different behaviors that'll automatically like kick up. Like,
Mhm.
if I see a cigarette, I'm like, remember the times you were running, bro? Like that was hurtful. That sucked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's good. And so when you went on the journey of overcoming, the nicotine addiction and also the alcohol addiction, was there anyone or anything that gave you guidance or motivation, or was it kind of like just self-motivated?
Oh, I would love to say it was self-motivated, but like I mentioned before, like willpower and motivation eventually runs out, bro. It had to be something really, really internal that I can kind of like grasp on. Um, for me, it was always the my relationships that I've built over the years, they're the ones that suffered the most. So when I have like the thing that drove me is seeing my relationship deteriorate. And because like that became an internal drive for me because like you're you're like basically putting yourself in a situation where you could wreck it anyways. So like by doing that, like how do you feel about that? So I always felt, bro, like if every single time I've had a fight, every single time I've had an argument or like had a friendship that like broke up, bro. It like actually hurt me emotionally. So it was more of an emotional drive for me rather than the physical, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That
Like
it
it,
definitely does make sense because the thing with addiction is that a lot of the time, I mean, if you look past the way that it's hurting you, a lot of the time it's actually hurting others
yeah,
quite the same amount, really.
yeah, man. And that drove me, that actually drove me to actually change my behavior. So basically, to answer your question in a nutshell, my biggest motivation is relationships. Like how, like I treasure that like quite a fair bit, and I'm like a very people's person. But when I am like away from people, I'm very like introverted in my thoughts and like I unpack everything, bro. Like it's a downward spiral. It's actually really terrible, but on the offset, it looks like I'm thinking, but basically I'm doing calculations in my head, like how can I do this better? Like, what am I doing wrong? And how can I, how can I build this and how can I fix this? It's all a big, yeah, it's all a big journey, man. And it's really tough sometimes. But over the years, as you get a little bit older, you find better ways of actually dealing with it. And for me, it's like literally you have to break it down one thing at a time. If you only have the capacity to like problem solve one or two things, just let it be one or two things, not five or six.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because you'll end up being in like a swirl, bro. It's unreal.
yeah. Take it one day at a time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I saw one of your posts that caught my eye because this I feel is super, super relevant to people listening. And honestly, it's a massive part of why I drink alcohol. And I'm going to be honest with you, reading about your journey and seeing your journey, and I even reached out to you the other day and I said, You're making me want to try go sober. But the thing that I find I'm going back to it over and over isn't because I like to necessarily be tipsy or because I like the taste of whiskey, but it's because of it's because of the social aspect. And with that social aspect comes, as we all know, the peer pressure of drinking. So I need you to just tell everybody listening what is some of the advice that you have, because I'm sure in those first few weeks or months of you going sober, it must have been incredibly challenging to not give into that.
Yeah, 100%, bro. And like, I'm not against alcohol. Like, I'm not against it, and I'm not against people having fun, but I am just against like the behaviors that kind of like sets the all the triggers in motion. So like, I'm very against it. Like just saying, hey, like, um, but my advice for that for people who are wanting to try it, it's not something that it'll work straight away. It's something that's an ongoing process. It might take a year or two, it might take 3 years, but I've had multiple attempts at it, and every single time I failed, and I failed miserably. So my best advice is don't go straight off the bat cold turkey like I did, because when I was ready to give up, I've already explored my options of what I can do to give up by that point. Most people, they're making like a decision today and decide to go cold turkey tomorrow. Like that's too much of a contrast in terms of making that switch. It should be something that you're continually planning to do. Like you're premeditating to give up. So you're taking like steps to it all the way up to the point where you're like, okay, now is the time I'm going to give up. Like,
Yeah. What
do
was
you know
some
what
of
I
the
mean?
Yeah, yeah, I get you. What was some of the steps that you took leading up to it?
Um, I still went and hung out with friends. That's still really important. I still hang out with them. I ordered food. I ate a lot. Uh, look for options of like alternative drinks, maybe. If there was the option, and if they don't have the option, I'm happy either way. But definitely, it's cool that we are seeing a change in that, and also with the introduction of like non-alcoholic beers. So bro, that was like the best thing to ever happen to New Zealand. Like I was like, yes, there's freaking options that I can actually just go and like choose from, not just Coke and Sprite. But yes, one, you can still go and hang out with friends. That's step number one. You can still do the same thing. It doesn't change who you are and what you're doing. Two, seek an alternative. The alternative's not there. There's always other things you can drink as well. There's still water. You can
Yeah.
always, I can always just fall back on water, but I know there's only so much water you can drink. And then the last thing I would say is like if you get sick of drinking water or the alternative options become like too bland, just leave. Like no, you obviously would have heard of the Irish goodbye,
Now, what's the Irish goodbye?
bro. It's literally you just gap it with us saying goodbye to anybody.
Oh yeah, I am familiar with that.
Like literally, if you, I mean, if you cut your losses quick, it just makes it a little bit easier. And most of the time, people will be like, "Oh, where'd you go?" And I was like, "I went home and sleep." And they were like, "Oh, sweet," and they'll just carry on with their life, like nothing changes. I used to be
Yeah.
a big like I used to stress about what people think if I left early or just like not do anything. I honestly, man, the amount of times I've like gapped parties in the last 2 years, it's freaking hilarious. I either take home pizza, leftover food. Otherwise, the people that's holding the party are just like, bro, take this with you. They end up giving you more stuff to go eat at home. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yo, that's sweet. I'm down with that.
Yeah.
Um, but it is really, really important that you have these steps as well. And you just gotta understand people care, but not care enough to the point they were like
Yeah, I
they're
was
like,
just about to say that. Like, people care way less about you than you think they do.
yeah. And the ones who like honestly the ones you love and who you treasure, bro, they understand. Like they get it. Um, but yeah, it's funny that you say that about people that care about you actually not drinking because the ones who actually like peer pressure you always have like the worst problems themselves. Like they've got like, bro, like you're telling me to drink and you can't even deal with yourself drinking. Like, bro,
Yeah.
mind your own business. Like,
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
but yeah, I guess, bro, still go and hang out with your friends, seek an alternative, do an Irish goodbye if you have to, and then at the end of the day, bro, you're saving money, you're saving brain cells. You're getting enough sleep, you're getting food, and you're still living happy. So that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree, man. I completely agree. And so when you started to go sober, and obviously you would have had more time on your hands not drinking. So tell me about some of like the hobbies or skills that you picked up, if any.
Don't judge me for this, bro, but I'm actually like the biggest nerd. So I'm currently studying a double degree in occupational therapy and physiotherapy. So when I am not studying, I'm actually studying. I'll show you. So these books here are the books I go through at the moment.
What kind of books
Um,
are they?
one on business, one on money, one on investing and marketing.
Cool. That is so awesome. I have a lot of respect for that. And for those of you who are listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and can't see, Philly has just shown me a stack of fat books with sticky notes all through them. And I really like that, Philly, because that hobby that you have picked up from not drinking is doing you nothing but good things. And that's just constant. And that's what you're saying about like, it's a journey of just continuously growing as a person and improving. And
Yeah.
like, honestly, that is so great to see because it is not that often that you will find and meet someone who, in their spare time, is educating themselves on things like business or marketing or finance.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, bro, it's honestly like I could sit here for hours and just do it. Like you do have days when like, why am I doing this? But at the end of the day, man, like I'm honestly, if my brain is not stimulated, I just get so bored. And then like boredom is so good to a certain degree, but sometimes I think boredom is like the motivator to kind of like push you to do something. I just so happen to love books. When I first came over to New Zealand, the I couldn't speak a word of English. So believe it or not, how I sound right now, if you were hanging out with my families, they'll consider me plastic tongan because I
Oh,
sound
really?
yeah, because I sound like this, and I'm like, wow, cool, thanks. Um, but the thing that got me into reading is that when I first came over to primary school, they used to send me to special groups reading. And so I had a teacher named Mrs. Jenkins. If you hear this one day, she got me into this habit of reading a book, and she's always said to me that you can almost learn anything in a book. So I
Yeah.
kind of like took that and it stuck with me for life, bro. And if I could show you, I've got bookshelves this here, bookshelves here, under my desk, bookshelves to my right. It's
Oh,
it's just a
awesome.
library.
That's so cool. Shout out Mrs. Jenkins. I'm sure that
Yeah, she was the bomb.
yeah, for real. If she heard you say that, I'm sure that it would just put the biggest smile on her face, you know?
Yeah, she was the coolest teacher.
Yeah. Well, what did she teach you?
Um, I guess basically like the importance of knowledge and how like you can gain a lot from just a book. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you learn about specifically, but you can learn a lot about a lot of things if you just pick up a book and just kind of like take that mentality that you can take something away from it.
Yeah, yeah, for real. Even if it's just like increasing your vocabulary. And
Right one.
yeah, and so that kind of leads perfectly onto the question of what kind of like changes in your health, both physical and mental, have you noticed since going sober? I mean, we've already spoken about like the
Oof.
mental stimulation with learning
Yeah.
new things.
Physically, I it's a giving. I love trading basically. So I guess the biggest thing with drinking dropping out of my normal habits is that I don't have to start again every single time I'm training. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but have you ever done a program and you've gotten so deep into the program and then you drink and it feels like you're starting that program again? Like that's what's changed. So like because alcohol is out of the picture, I'm progressively getting better in terms of fitness, and I feel when I was like younger, I thought I was fit and I thought I was healthy. But if I could compare myself now to how I am, well, I would absolutely dominate who I was back then. Like literally and figuratively. Like I would absolutely dominate. Not only that I'm like mentally aware, I'm physically capable of doing more with like the drawbacks.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. And that is definitely one of the reasons why I want to give it a go as well, just going sober. And on that note, like for someone like me who, I do drink, um, if I'm wanting to try going sober, how long would you recommend if someone is just wants to give it a go to see what it's like and see if there's any noticeable changes in both that physical and mental? How long would you suggest that they give it a crack for?
Um, I've always kind of go by this rule that it's it kind of like seeps into personal training as well. That you'll start to see changes within 6 to 8 weeks, but the real big changes in your habits come in within like 12 weeks. So the 3 month mark. We have dry July, which is 1 year out of the 12 months. So you have 1 month to undo everything, and then you have 11 months to put it all back in together. So I highly recommend and just try a month. And then if you feel like you can push it, add another week on that. If by the end of that week, add another week. It's accumulation, bro. So you've obviously like you've studied yourself and you would have learned a lot more about compound effects, right? So it's compounding interest, bro, in your well-being. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
0.1%, bro, is better than 0.00%, bro.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good way to look at things. I really like that one. And just before we start wrapping it up here, um, I mean, you've given buckets of good advice, but is there any last personal message that you have or advice to addicts of any kind that you just want to get off your chest?
Yeah, man. There's so many good things I could say, but if I could just round it up as people always make excuses of why they can't do things. But if you think about it, if it's important enough to you, you'll find a way. 100%. Like you'll find a way. Like just like you find a way to create an addiction. Like you found the means to do it. If you could find the means to put the same effort into creating a bad habit and addiction, you can put the same amount of effort into undoing that. Like it's as simple as that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And um now Philly is the time if you just want to, promote any of your socials or like your classes that you do for people who might be interested in, keeping up with your journey and maybe get some motivation to start their own sobriety journey. Now's the time as well.
Um, bro, honestly, I'm sure you would tag me in the in Instagram or stuff like that, bro. Like you can follow me on Instagram, and then from there I've got like TikToks and stuff like that. But I'm terrible at talking about myself, so I'd rather you just see what I go through via social media and how I go about it, and then you can make a judgment at the end of the day if you want to give me a follow or not. Like no harm, no foul, bro. So it's yeah, but yeah, thank you so much. It's been a
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Philly. I really appreciate it. And for everybody listening in, I just want to say don't be hesitant to reach out to somebody who you know or have crossed paths with that you've seen doing something cool and just have a conversation with them because Philly is someone who I worked with like 4 years ago or something. And, we didn't really keep that much in contact. And I just reached out to him a few weeks ago and he decided to jump on the podcast with me, and what's come out of that is a really awesome, insightful conversation. So I really encourage any of you guys listening, and if there's people that you want to learn from or people that inspire you, just go out there and strike up a conversation, because the worst thing that's going to happen is that they say no, and the best thing that's going to happen is that they say yes and you get some great advice. So
100%.
Philly, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really do appreciate it.
No problem,
And
bro.
for everybody listening in, if you've made it this far through the episode, thank you so, so much. I really appreciate it, like always. If you did enjoy this episode, please, all I ask is just send it to one person who you think will also enjoy it. And please don't forget to leave me a rating on Spotify. And with that being said, I will see you guys next week.